including the system.
No, absolutely. Everything's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, now it's
Well, hello everybody. It's my great pleasure to be here today. I would have liked to be sitting at a table in a more normal condition, but in today's presentation, I'll try to give a bit of a background on Biped and the venture that I started about a year and a half back. I start by introducing Biped and then reflecting a bit on what research and university brought me in this venture, and where we see like the next steps and some of the key highlights and key learnings that I hope in some way can transfer to your own ideas and own ventures in the future. So to give a tiny bit of background, Biped is an AI copilot for blind and visually impaired people. So the idea is to be able to guide blind people in unknown environments. So there's around 2 million blind people in Europe, in the US, 3 million blind people in Europe. And the struggles they face on a daily basis are essentially to be able to detect obstacles. So they would use a white cane most of the time, and the white cane can only detect ground obstacles. So it's quite often that they get upper body obstacle that hit them. It's also challenging for them to detect objects and understand the scene around them. So finding where the crosswalk is, or where an electric car is coming from, for example. And finally, navigation from point A to point B remains a key challenge for them. So they would usually either do it the first time with their relatives or with orientation mobility trainer that teach them how to move properly from point A to point B. And then they just have to do that again and again and again for each and every new path that they want to learn. And yet, if you think about it, it's somehow like what is going on with autonomous driving vehicle. They avoid obstacle, they understand trajectories of surrounding elements, and they guide you from point A to point B using integrated maps. So that's why we built Biped. So Biped is a smart harness that is worn on the shoulders. It has a set of 3D cameras. So what I mean by 3D cameras, just a generic term to say that we have depth cameras with an infrared sensor that have day and night vision with over 170 degrees of field of view in front of the user. We have a small computation unit. So all computation happen locally. And essentially the harness is solving 3 tasks. It detects the obstacle. It finds all the surrounding objects using object detection, and predicts the trajectories of all surrounding elements to filter what is relevant. And it also guides the user using GPS navigation information. So we really try to solve these 3 tasks at one. And the way we provide feedback, so the device is around 670 grams in its latest version, has a bit above 4 hours battery, 4-hour continuous use, meaning on average, you would use the device for maybe 1 hour, 1.5 hours per day. So that's nearly 3 days of usual battery. And
sorry to interrupt you, Mael. So is it your full screen? Because I am able to see one icon of a user icon.
Sorry, on the what side?
In the right hand side, on the top right. Yeah. Can you? Okay. Yeah. No, I think.
Wait, you say?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
that, or?
Now. Yeah. Now it's.
Is it better, or?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, sorry, I've actually never tried to share the screen on the phone previously. And so the way we would warn the user about the position of surrounding elements is using bone conduction headphones. So we use sounds to provide feedback. So the sound feedback pattern is actually quite intuitive to use. So we have the position of, for example, a bike that we detect, and we're going to use object detection to find that bike and then predict the trajectory of that bike. And from there, we will predict whether the bike has an important trajectory for the user. So whether the bike has a risk of collision or not. So in that case, the bike is in red because the bike is moving away. So there is no risk of collision with the user. But on the other hand, there is a group of people far behind. We detect that group of people, we put a bounding box around, and then we have a small audio library that describes the scene that matches so each and every type of object. So if we detect a group of people, we will play the sound that the person has learned to associate to a group of people. And we have a small audio vocabulary that just describes everything. And we will play the sound in bone conduction headphones. Bone conduction headphones are essentially around the ears, so they don't block the rest of surrounding sounds. And once you have the position of the group of people, it will play the sound and it will apply a 3D effect. So if the group
Hello? Mael?
I think he got disconnected.
Yeah. Hello? Mael?
We'll probably, wait for him to join back in. Mael,
Yeah, I have messaged him. Yeah.
and in the meantime, if we can take 1 or 2 questions from audience, if you agree, Dr. Reda, so far.
Yeah. Sorry, Anjan, can you please repeat? I was trying to.
I'm saying while Mael is joining back, we can take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. If there is, they can raise their hands and we can, or they can post their questions in the chat and we can address them.
Yeah, sure.
Mael has joined back.
Yeah, there was some circumstances. So Mael, you can continue.
Sorry, it got disconnected for some reason.
Okay, no
I'll just
problem. Yeah.
share my screen again.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were reaching the end of this. So essentially, we had blind user, and we told him to try to find where the bench was around him, where the group of people was, so he can converge to the position of these objects pretty easily. If someone's walking faster than you on a sidewalk, and then you need to stop, or that's a blind person who's walking straight, so he's hearing a constant sound on the right, as long as there's a wall, and then when the wall stops, the person essentially knows they can turn right. And that's some of the tests that we've been running with Lex Gillette, who's a blind Paralympic athlete. And we told him there's someone in front of you, try to find the person, and he could converge to the position of the person pretty easily. Now I want to give you a quick detail on what's happening internally. This is a demo of the software where you see the objects that are being detected. On the right, there's all the predicted trajectories with the person that's coming in your way. And if we just break it down, we first have a phase of scene understanding. So we detect the car, we detect the person, we filter their trajectory, so we predict their trajectories. Then we will filter relevant information. So what's happening here, it's a very short sequence, but you see the car at the front is moving to the right, and at some point is turning red. And the reason the car is actually turning red is because the car is moving away from the user. So once we know it's a car, it's pretty close to the user. It's about 4 meters away, but it's also moving away from the middle on. So it does not represent a risk anymore. And the reason why we put it in red is because we were just not playing a sound anymore for the car. Now, if we focus on what's coming next, there's the pedestrian, and you can really see the trajectory of the pedestrian that is coming towards the user. And essentially, we will play the sound, which unfortunately does not work over Zoom, but we will play the sound coming from the sidewalk where the user is located, and the person will be able to hear that. And at the current state, we've tested it with around 100 people, and they highlighted essentially that it could be an all-in-one solution, and that it's very intuitive to use. And we'll be launching in September in Europe. So to give a tiny bit of a background, the Chanticleer already gave quite a detailed introduction. I had a mix between economics first in my bachelor's and in my master's, and then I transitioned to data science, and then I started a PhD in machine learning at EPFL and EDIAP, which I left 2 years in to focus on the development of Biped once we secured funding. And I met my co-founder at a hackathon that was organized by our lab, and he's a computer scientist specialized in computer vision. And most of our team is essentially software engineers from the robotics field. So in terms of pricing, what we're trying to do is to offer also a subscription model, and that's one of the key learnings also we had is the down payment that we would require to have the device being accessible for everybody is actually pretty high. And with subscription models, you can break down the cost by quite a margin. Essentially, what you'd find on the market right now is a couple of obstacle detection white canes that can vibrate if there's an obstacle that is close to you. So they have obstacle avoidance capabilities. You have smart glasses like Orcam that can do scene description. So you point at something with your finger, or you just press on the side, and essentially it will describe the scene for you using speech. It is pretty slow, but it works very well. And then you have navigation systems like Google Maps, or hardware counterparts like FieldSpace, for example. And our aim is really to try to do all of that together. And to give you a tiny bit of a roadmap, we'll be launching in 5 to 6 months from now in Western Europe, and we aim for a quick expansion afterwards, both in Europe and in the US. All right, so that was the more business pitch, which I hope gave a bit of background. If you do have any questions, just also feel free to stop me anytime. And I want to jump in also a tiny bit more on the journey from student to entrepreneur, and some of the assumptions that I had regarding what our experience would be and how we got challenged. I think in general, I've launched my first startup when I was 18. I was in my bachelor's degree, and I've always considered the studies to be a good moment to give entrepreneurship a first try. The main reason I would say is that you don't have much to lose at that moment, apart from a bit of time. And it's really like seeking a quick, like if you want to fail, or I mean, if your business will fail on this, at least it will fail super quickly, and you'll get back on track and have the ability to leverage what you've learned in that challenge very quickly afterwards, whether it's like in a corporate job or building a next venture. It's also a challenging time, that's for sure, because everybody's got very limited cash. You've got sometimes limited experience in the field, but it's I would say in general one of the most exciting times that I've considered in general, because you have the knowledge, and that's what I felt like I had, the theoretical knowledge that allowed me to think of a field from the outside and think, how can technology disrupt that field, and how can we do just way better than anything that has been done so far on this. So part of what we wanted to achieve quite early on is our team knew nothing about vision impairment. So how do we become field experts in this? Because we don't have a medical degree, and we don't have ophthalmologists in the team. Essentially, what we try to do is we try to move away from just like sending an online survey and asking customers what they want. That's like the first step to take. But in general, we just try to spend days with our customers, trying to understand their pains and not just surveys. And we also tried to, so that really means we contacted the hospital where they were orientation and mobility trainers, and we asked them, hey, can we spend like 2 days with you and see how you train blind people navigate with the white cane, these kind of things. We tried to find, and we looked it up on LinkedIn, who's knowledgeable in the field and who can we contact that either has done something similar. So we reached out to fellow entrepreneurs who built similar solutions and either like made a success or failed at some point and had some press coverage still for their system, or those that were still actively developing, still startup level, or this kind of things. And we were also seeking, I mean, and that's like more a personal trait, I would say. I was looking for experience very early on. So during my studies, I was working part-time on either like trying to teach some data science concepts or work in a couple of startups, even, I mean, most of the time for free, just to gain experience, trying to get summer jobs in those fields, because I think, yeah, in general, like getting the practical experience also from the work industry in general, knowing how it's done in some startups and how I wanted to build a biped ecosystem afterwards, I think was very interesting. And I saw stuff that I wanted to replicate and stuff that I wanted to avoid because I felt it was a bit toxic in the workplace. And I think we also have the ability as a new generation coming out of university, for example, to build trust by sharing knowledge in a specific field and kind of becoming experts for people of our generation in that field. And many people around me would ask me about assistive technologies on several stuff, whereas like a year and a half ago, I knew basically nothing on that field. So I think it's that's how we approach this. But becoming field experts and moving away from a student that has generic understanding but cannot apply the or does not have like the field understanding, but instead like becoming specialized and starting to have a good field expertise is I think very interesting. We also try to involve end users, and I cannot stress out how important that is and how this is something that if we were to redo it, I would probably redo it even deeper, and it's just a shortcut to the correct solution. In general, what we've seen is in week one, essentially we reached out to the Swiss Federation for the Blind. We didn't have anything. We had a sketch of a device that we wanted to present, and a couple of ideas of how to eventually make it work. And that's what we started with. And we reached out and we asked, do you think it could be interesting? And they started giving us pieces of advice on how to do it, what had been done, and how we could make it work better in the future. And that's how we started the development of our first device. And afterwards, once we had validated the high-level concept, what we essentially did is we started to prepare customer interviews. And once we had those customer interviews, we sent it online, but we also like tried to talk to all those customers physically as much as possible, essentially, to also because the forms online are a bit, usually it's a multiple choice question. So it's a bit limited in how much they can provide feedback, and most often listening to what they have to say is a lot more valuable. So that was I would say a key aspect. One core thing is also that we ask them, how much would you be willing to pay for the solution? Because it will discard a potential some potential path quite early on. because if you just come up with a solution that will cost $10,000 and there's no market for that, there's a couple of things you won't even bother developing at that time. So that's the prototyping process we followed. So that's the actual first sketch we presented to the Swiss Federation for the Blind. And then as an iteration, we started with a belt, and we noticed that as we ran customer tests, there were a couple of ergonomic problems. So people were actually using the white cane and placing their hand in front of their belt. So that was partially occluding the camera. And we also had the problem that they, in fact, wanted to have something that could understand depth. So the first one we had only had like a flat view with a monocular camera. And so then we moved on after from V3 of our prototype, we moved on to something that was worn on the chest. And then but it's the system at that point still had a lot of things that needed to be tightened and adjusted and everything. And at some point with our V5, that was the first system that was entirely wireless. The ergonomics were still not exactly on point, but that was a first approach. And we were, that's the moment we've started to get the best feedback from there. One thing also that is crucial is to be able to be like when you look for, either you say you want to, you know that you want to go and start a company. That was always my case. I knew I wanted to start a company, but I did not really, I had no real clue what to do and how to start it. And I really started like thinking about the momentums and where technology had not yet disrupted the field, and that field seemed as a good momentum. The reason was that technology had evolved in the recent years. So real-time object detection was not possible before 2016 on edge devices. So it had only been 5 years since the whole thing was possible, which is, it takes time to put up like a device like that on the market. It will take us a year and a half to 2 years for us to go there, but still, like reflecting back, it's not such a long time since this kind of technologies are possible. Customers' expectations have also changed on that field, mostly because companies like Orcam that do smart glasses that use AI to do scene description have essentially done a good part of the democratizing job, which is interesting for us because there's way fewer like market education to do in that aspect. The customer knowledge has also changed. Everybody knows about self-driving vehicles. That's a metaphor that we can leverage, whereas it was still a bit of a niche before 5 years ago. And I would say that in general, this was one market and one potential application, and we're seeing in the past 12 months we've been seeing more and more innovation in that field, which is just very exciting. But a lot of markets still remain to be disrupted via technology. So I'm just hoping that it will be the case pretty soon. And it's I think it's also an interesting kind of innovation, because you don't have to be completely new in terms of market. Being new in terms of market is challenging because you will have to do market education. That just requires a lot of funding. If the technology is new and the market is new, that's of course like somehow the hardest kind of innovations that you can try to put out on the market. What we are doing is essentially assembling a bunch of pieces all together and applying them to an existing market. And the way we assemble the technologies has never been done before, which moves us just a bit right of the incremental innovation. But I mean, in this area, most of the technology that we have access to nowadays can still disrupt a lot of potential markets, which I think is a very simple and very interesting approach to building a startup at that level. So that's essentially one thing I also wanted to bring up is on the device itself. There's a small training app that we have developed, essentially because we wanted, once we started testing the device with end users, we wanted to have more and more capabilities and more sounds to have the description of the environment done as smoothly as possible. And one thing we noticed from that moment on is people started to maybe feel a bit overwhelmed by the quantity of sounds or like the diversity of sounds we had.
Mael,
Yep.
Mael, there is a question probably. Yeah,
yep.
From Luxfit. Yeah. So, do you have any question? You can ask it, or else we can take at the end.
Probably at the end would be.
Yeah,
great,
probably at the end. Yeah,
Christopher.
Mael, we can continue. We can take it.
Okay. Sorry, I can't see the questions at the same time then on the phone, but interrupt me if there's any. And yeah, and so we started, like, from the end user experience standpoint, we started to notice that we needed a way for them to learn about the sounds that we developed and learn that language. And the approach we took to that was just to make an app where they could have digital training. So essentially we play a sound in space, and then we ask them the question, what do you think that sound was? And then we just validate their understanding. So we provide training directly on the app. And since we do hardware, like, we needed to do hardware for the whole system to become hands-free and for it to be adopted. But we still had the barrier of how do you scale this approach? And one answer we found, which is probably not the definitive answer, but it's the first approach, is to say, to scale that, at least we don't need a person in the middle, or there should be a way not to have a person in the middle. And the online training platform is essentially solving this. Now, this was not perfect. So we've been constantly learning from also the end user requirements in terms of accessibility for the apps, and this is something also that I wanted to stress out on terms of user experience. I think it's like, especially in accessibility as we do, making an app that is not entirely accessible, and that was still the previous design of the app, where it still had low contrast in some areas. It still used logo, for example, for blind users, whereas text is just a lot more intuitive for them to use, because they can use voiceover and other text to speech technologies. Was something that made it feel like we didn't really know what we were building in the first versions, and over time we were happy to come up with something that is a bit more accessible and partner with a couple of end user association that just make sure that our app remains accessible, for example. So that was also one of the learnings, apart as part of the market understanding process. It's also understanding the user experience requirements. On one side, we knew that the device needed to have as few cables as possible and needed to be easy to put on. And on the other side, we also learned quite a lot from what we initially knew on app development, for example, because the whole user experience chain has to be fully customized for them. So yeah, this is essentially the summary of the last year that we've been spending building Biped. There's a lot more exciting stuff, of course, going on in the next few months. The biggest one will be launching the device in September in Western Europe. And in terms of our learning experiences, I would say I was in general quite fortunate to have tried to launch a first startup at the age of 18 and a bit screwed it up at some point because we shut down the company when I was 20. But I at that point made a lot of mistakes. One of them was to not be able to identify what was our true minimum viable product. And one of the reasons we're trying to bring that device so fast on the market, because it's a full software development process plus hardware that we put out on the market in about a year and a half. The one thing that we are trying to cope with is identifying what is our true minimum viable product. And we think we're converging to this, which is the folded version that you see on this slide. We think we're converging to what is the actual MVP, because in the first startup that I did, we just waited like a year and a half to get and that was purely software, but we just waited a year and a half to build something that we thought was great. And then the day we launched, we just realized that people were stuck in the process on the platform, and it had not been co-developed with them, and it had not been optimized with them. So that's something we've been really trying to pay attention to. And yeah, and I would say as a maybe closing remark, the one thing that I've also noticed in the past few months is that at university, there's quite often we're given a task and we need to come up with a solution around the task. In research, it's a bit different because you're also a bit more free to identify the task you want to work on, or at least the angle you want to work on, because most of the time the task is still given and benchmarked, etc., etc. And what really changed in entrepreneurship is that you're completely free to define the task you want to work on, as long as it's answering in some way customer requirements, and that you can find a business application for that. So that's something we've been trying to keep in mind. And I thank you for your attention. I'm sorry again about doing that on the phone. I hope it was not too much of a pain, and I hope it's still understandable and that the point was okay. And happy to take any of your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mael. I think it was a great talk. And now let's move to question answer session. So now people have already pasted some questions, but first I'd like to take some questions. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and you can ask to Mael. So anyone has any question to ask?
I think Lakshmi Priya Bhue, he has a question to Aditya Kumar. Both have raised your hands. You can ask your questions.
Yeah. Please.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned about like at the age of 18, you already doing a startup, and you were not able to find out what is a true MVP. Would you please elaborate on what is true MVP and how can we, in any concept, we can verify it?
Yeah,
thanks.
No, that's an excellent question and an excellent point. Happy to elaborate on that. So the first startup that I did was a startup that was trying to put in contact people who were buying a car and people who needed a car for a couple of weeks, by just replicating crowdfunding in a way where you say, yeah, I need a car and I need 5,000 to buy my car. And on the other hand, people said, yeah, I need a car for like a couple of weeks and I'm just going to use it, and we just buy it together. So that was a co-buying sort of platform. And we just thought at the beginning, yeah, we probably need like a platform that can handle payments online and that can do a lot of things, hold the deposit, and where you see like a live progress bar of how much of the car has been funded and all this stuff. And we just realized over time it was a pure mistake to have been waiting for like a platform to be able to do all of that. We could have just gone with a WordPress platform and just do stuff by hand, where we could have faked everything and just update the progress bar manually. And that's something we realized that we missed. But we only realized it, I mean, to be fair, we realized it once the company shut down, and because we just lost a bunch of money trying to come up with that platform. None of the team members was a web developer. And yeah, so all of that was quite quite a learning experience. And now in hardware, it's something even more different because there are certain standards that you need to respect, and we can't do like things too bad in terms of what kind of device we put out on the market. So yeah, so I think the true MVP will essentially be sit in the car. It's a bit easier. The true MVP is essentially something that you think is the good enough approach, will not have the problem of taking you too much time and too much resources. And it's also something that you can co-develop with some of your end users, and yeah, and I think thinking smartly about that will bring quite a bit of value. I hope it's clear. It's hard to transfer that to any field, but I think in general, keeping the concept in mind that you don't need something perfect. There's the popular saying that if you're not ashamed of the product that you launch, you're launching too late. So the first version should really be as early as possible, and it doesn't matter if the things you do not scale at all, and if you have to do things really manually, and if it's just a web interface, for example, to get started with, and then you just do everything manually. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mael. So next question. So I think Lakshmi Priya, she raised a hand. So do you want to ask, or let me ask some of the questions pasted in the chat. So one of the questions from Siddharth Saurav. So he mentioned, thank you very much for wonderful presentation, Mael. I am curious if your device can detect object approaching from the sides and behind the person. Are there dedicated cameras monitoring those positions as well?
Yeah, no, great question. To be fair, so the first version we had only camera in front, so we were able to identify 60 by 90 degrees in front of the user, so 60 horizontal by 90 vertical. And now we have those cameras, but we have 3 of them. So we have one on the left and one on the right, and they're dedicated to identify things far left and far right. So we have 170 degrees of flat field of view from now on, because the biggest use case that we came up with when we tested the first version with only one camera was that people were standing at the crosswalk and they were and the camera was spotting the car, for example, quite late, because if you don't look far on the left and you only have 60 degrees of field of view horizontally, then you spot the car when the car is only just 1 or 2 seconds again away from the collision with the end user. But we don't have a specific camera in the back, on the other hand, because again, we asked them how often do you have collisions with people coming from behind, and they essentially said pretty much none of the times. So that's we disregarded that use case for the time being. But there's a couple of other applications where having a camera in the back would make sense, and that's outside of visual impairment that we can leverage in the future. So that's feasible. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So is there any other question from anybody? You can raise your hand or can ask. So even I have, I think there is another question is about Satyajit. Can we add geofencing features to this device so that we can easily detect critical landmark or places?
Yeah, that's also a very good point. We're doing that right now, actually, so that people can, in the app, define a couple of key places. For example, the bus stop they take to hop on the bus and then hop off the bus. The place they work at, or local association if they want to, or their home, or their relatives, and then they can just pinpoint those key interest points, and then they can ask for navigation to this point, but also when you reach the range close to one of these points, it's just going to create like a specific sound for that specific point, just so that you know that you're close to where your bus exit is, for example.
Yeah, Thanks, Mike. So, are there any questions from anybody? And I have one question, like, so, so yeah, many times also we discuss like how feasible you think this kind of product in means like in Indian context, like where the everything is very dynamic in nature. So where nothing is, is very systematic. You can find animals on the road. You don't know where, from which direction who can come. So
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. I mean, I've been following a couple of companies that do self-driving in India also to also see how they tackle the challenges of having roads that are a lot more busy and sometimes not as defined as concrete roads in the US. That would be like fairly, I mean, you reach a point where when the road is like super large and it's not too crowded, or it's not such a hard challenge to make at that point. So I think
can you mute yourself, Pradeep?
Yeah, thank you, Shantipriya. And so yeah, so I'm guessing that it will take more time for it to be ready for very dynamic environments, and it will especially require running faster so that it can track and predict trajectories of surrounding objects better. Because the main problem you have is that you really want to be able to filter down the information to as much as possible, like the very close and very important elements around the user. So that's one thing I think that will take a bit more time, but on a time frame of 3 to 5 years, I think that's it's feasible, but challenging.
Yeah, thanks. And also, there is another curious thing, like about like many of these students and many of the participants here, they are more into entrepreneurship. They want to do their own ventures. My question is like, this is something relating to hardware plus software. So, do you think how much challenge it? For example, like if you build some app or anything, so that one will be risk will be very less, so you can or it will be fast, you can launch it. So if you go for a devices like this, hardware is involved and you have to collect a lot of feedback from customers and you want to enrich that particular device in a time to time manner. So how things, if somebody is interested, so what is your suggestion like this?
Yeah, so software as a service in general, and or like software is easier to launch, is easier to scale, is easier to test and collect feedback on, because you can do basic A/B testing or just ask for, with a pop-up, ask feedback on the session for from an end user. And it's also easier to raise money usually for software companies. Nonetheless, hardware, I mean, none of us was from the hardware background. And I mean, I've worked with Shantipriya quite closely. And at the time I was working with Shantipriya, I basically knew nothing about hardware. And we're like one year in the thing. And I wouldn't say that I know a lot, but I know the basics. And the main choice we did was to say, if we want to do hardware, because we could have done pretty much all we do on the smartphone app, but the main problem is that end users would have had to carry the smartphone with the hand, and we've just believed that the solution that would really bring value should be hands-free. You should forget that you have it. Otherwise, there will always be the barrier of ergonomics and adoption there. So we thought, okay, we need hardware, but how do we do hardware for cheap and fast? And one way to approach that is to say, okay, we just do components that are available on the market, and you make anything fit in on those components. So we took like a computation unit from Coral, we took from Google, we took cameras from Intel. The battery pack is like pre-made in China, that from like another project, and we just got spare batteries, and the only thing that was left to build was we 3D print the cases of the device, even for the production unit, with just a better 3D printing quality. And all of that together, we would have spent less than 5% of our entire budget on hardware. The rest was salaries, software, this kind of consulting, this kind of things, legal consulting. But that would have been less than 5%. So it's possible. It's not the solution that will keep in the long run, that's for sure. And the day we launch and the day we reach profitability a bit later, we also have in mind to like redo a couple of things where we had quite harsh limitations because of the hardware we embedded, and we were a bit frustrated not to be able to like have that latest CPU and embed like a small GPU and these kind of things. That was okay. And again, that went in the definition of our MVP. And we thought, okay, our MVP has to be hands-free. That's like one of the core features where we can't fake it. Like it needs to be there. But at the same time, it needs to remain as cheap as possible. And we're just going to buy a couple of components. The electronics of the device is super simple. It's a computation unit, battery, cameras, and a couple of cables between, and that's it. And most of them, you can buy them from Amazon or anything. So it's yeah, now we moved on to something a tiny bit more advanced than this, but not really. We just got supplier that do those cables in a more robust way, but nothing fancy at all.
Yeah, that is good to know about this. And yeah, I think we have discussed, and we have now. I'd like to, if any questions from any of these core member like Anjan or Santanu or Colonel Farida. So if you have any questions, yeah, I can ask Mael. So already we have discussed many things.
Yeah, I'll take a few things to Mael, and just to
not audible,
probably trigger that thought of entrepreneurs.
Can you repeat your sentence again?
I'm not audible.
Yeah, repeat it.
Oh, thank you. My first thing is to thank you to Mael. And I wanted his talk here would have triggered the entrepreneurship ideas in many kids who are listening. Around 50 people here would have that confusion or would have that question where to start. So anything you want to say where to start?
Yeah, that's it's the first and most important question, I think. So thanks for bringing it up. We started by I think the very basic is when I talked about trying to find that opportunity on certain markets and think about the knowledge you have and where to apply it. I think it just at some point it requires just sitting down, either like observing what's around you and thinking how you could help one of the things that are surrounding you, or thinking of like working and getting out to people that think they're feeling that maybe me. That one thing that has always worked is I needed at some point to have a time that was calm, and I didn't have my phone around. I was not thinking about anything else than trying to find that idea and come up with like what I wanted to spend my next years working on. I know it's like stressful thinking sometimes, but for me, like taking a walk or being in the car and driving somewhere was moments that were pretty calm and that I felt were quite helping to get some ideas. And then once you've found an idea, I think what costs zero money and takes virtually very few time is just think about your knowledge and the idea you have, and just go out and talk to people, reach out on LinkedIn or by email, or try to call them on the phone and really try to validate as much as possible. There's like zero spendings requires at that moment. Reach out even like on Facebook or whatever social media platform to people who do either alternative solution or that could be potential customers, and then really try to validate your understanding of most of this. And the moment you start to have more and more people line up on one common feedback, you know that you're getting all the green lights you need to start moving forward with your idea. And this is where it might start to require capital. And an approach to that I've always been like pretty secure and quite conservative. Coming to this, I left my PhD only the day we secured funding for our project. So there's always a moment when you start, which is not the easiest, where you do two things at the same time. So either like you have a job and then you do that, or you have an internship and then you do that, or you're a student full time and then you do that on the side. So it is definitely work, and it's not just. But maybe sometimes you have worked like a bit and you have some savings and you want to focus like for the next 3-4 months to work on something. I think just getting those milestones is already very very important and is reachable by virtually anyone, at least on their free time. I think one thing is also the team that you're going to come up with, and it's probably important to try to find profiles that are complementary and that are not too similar to yours. When I did my first startup, I did it with a great friend of mine that I'm still in contact with. But the problem was we had the same profile. We're like, both of us were doing the same things. I loved working with him, but we were just like, both of us were doing the same things, and none of us could do the things that were remaining on the to-do list. So attending hackathons, going to events, talking to, reaching out to people who you think have the skills that you require is a great way to start. And then I think the final thing is, if you have a long development process ahead of you and you know you need fundings, then you should probably think quite ahead of how you're going to fund your venture. We started by doing at the very start, we were doing consulting because I was doing some freelancing. A company offered us to do a bit of a bigger consulting mission that would just pay my co-founder to come to Switzerland for about 6 to 8 months, which gave us time to figure things out and incorporate the company. So we did that. And then we reached out to a couple of business angels and venture capitalists, because we knew that we had to go under the radar for a year and a half to really come up with our device and make it take off the ground, which is what's left now to do. So yeah, and having a good case there is it starts with the team, and it starts with the understanding that you have of the market. So I think respecting the first two basics of coming up with people that have good profiles that are not the same as yours, and really understanding correctly where you can apply the things you know, and coming up with these good ideas is doing a lot of the job afterwards, to raise money and then later make the company a great success. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. There is a hand raised from Dr. Arjit Krishna. So yeah, you can ask your question. Yeah, so if anybody has any question, anything to ask, or anyway, I think if no more questions.
Santipriya, I'd like to add something.
Yes, sir.
Firstly, Mael, this is Colonel Aditya Parida from Sweden, and it was a excellent presentation under the circumstance you have presented.
Yeah,
and hats up to you.
Sorry.
That's great. And what I liked your most is you said, you should try. Like, you are good in something, you are doing it, and when you are doing it, and try to do it young, and especially as a student. So then, the risk is, only you give time. So I like that part. So it is a lesson to all our young students who are listening here. And also I feel, any of you, there is a little, you are a hesitation, you feel little stressed. So anyone who wants to do something, he has to do a SWOT analysis. What is his strength? And what is the threat? And what are the opportunity? And of course, and from there, he can always find out, like we say, SWOT is strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. So one should always be doing that evaluation of self. And once you are good at something, and once you find that, yes, this is perhaps I can, because after all, when we want to do something, it has to be applied. Technology has to be applied. And when it is applied for a problem solving, and then you know that it is going to sell and it is going to work. And of course, your other experiences are fantastic. So this is where I can say that this is what our young students and the entrepreneurs who are still listening can learn from this presentation. And great work, Mael, and I appreciate, great job. And you are a good inspiration to a lot of our young people. So thank you. And I hope the audience have got the message and what is the lesson learned. So thank you, one and all. Back to you, Santipriya.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we have got all the discussion and questions, and I'd like to thank you, Mael. So, and I remember the work we used to do, and it's a very good experience working with you. So I bit emotional. Anyway,
pleasure. And again, sorry for the circumstances, but if that was in any way and shape or form useful, I'm very happy.
Yes, sure.
And
so
yeah,
I hope
in my LinkedIn inbox is also like open, or my email. If you think I can help for anything from anyone, just let me know. So yeah.
Yeah, surely we'll ask you. We are planning for more sessions on Instagram in FTP kind of things, where we want to take a particular subject, because I know you are very good at speech and NLP and data science. So definitely we'll take your help. And many of the students, they are also trying to, they're interested in entrepreneurship, building product or building company. So definitely they can connect with you and they can take your help. And so at the end, I'll wish you all the best for your product launch, and I hope you'll definitely do well. And one thing I'd like to really appreciate about that, you boldly accept all your failures, because and that will be the great thing. I feel many people, they say they just hide it, but you boldly mention that all your failures, and that is a very good positive thing I found. And at the same time, I'd like to thanks all the participants and core members for all your supports, and hope we can continue further. And so here we can end the session. So thank you. Thank you, Mael.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mael.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of
Bye.